Good afternoon, everyone. Unless something has happened over in the House in the last hour or so, I do think that is a good place to start. First of all, I think the Speaker's done an excellent job of unifying our side, and it's logical for many of you to begin to wonder what happens next, whether the House passes this measure or not. What happens next is what I have said repeatedly for the last couple of months. Divided government is not unusual in this country. We've had divided government more often than not since World War II. When the American people elect divided government, they're saying, you guys need to get together and figure out how to solve the big problems. So regardless of whether the House passes this measure or doesn't, I want to disabuse any of you of the notion that there's any measure clearing the Senate with 60 votes that could be approved by this House is essentially zero. This agreement must be reached because we must never default, and the agreement needs to be reached between the Speaker and the President.
And the House Republicans have put forward a serious, thoughtful plan that needs to be considered. It actually saves $4.5 trillion, including $500 billion, $500 billion, just in interest savings as a result of the bill that they put together. And hopefully they'll be able to execute on getting it across the finish line there. But when that happens, it should, as the leader pointed out, for anything to get signed into law, there's going to have to be an agreement between the House leadership, between the Speaker and the President. And the President has not met with the Speaker now for 83 days. That was the last time they had to sit down in the White House, was 83 days ago. And so I hope that the Biden administration will decide to engage with the House Republican leadership in a way that not only deals with the debt limit itself, but also with spending reforms, hopefully that address the fundamental issue of spending and debt. One of the issues that is coming out of this House plan is permitting reform. And as I think everyone knows, energy costs have increased dramatically under the Biden administration. Energy costs are up 36%. So if there is an issue that's crying out for attention, it's the issue of energy. And permitting reform is key to that, because right now it takes 4.5 years on average to get an environmental impact statement across the finish line. So we need permitting reform if we're going to have an all-of-the-above energy strategy for our country and for our economy, which of course is not just an economic issue, an energy issue, it's a national security issue, and I think we all know that. Unfortunately, Leader Schumer has said that the House package is dead on arrival, and I think that's a huge mistake. I hope that Democrats here in Washington and in the Senate, if the House can move on this, will be willing to sit down and talk about some of the things that we can do together that would make America less dependent upon foreign sources of energy and deal with that high cost of energy that is affecting the pocketbooks of everyday Americans. And we had a couple people here, Senator Capito, Senator Barrasso, who are doing a great job on that issue and the lead on that. And I'm hoping that they'll have some partners that will enable us to get something done on that very important issue.
This weekend I was in Wyoming at the Bridger Valley Rural Electric Association, their annual meeting, and their mission since 1938 has been to provide safe, affordable, reliable energy and electricity for their customers. Well, that mission is becoming mission impossible because Joe Biden's energy policies is so terrible. Energy is now unavailable, unreliable, unaffordable. Joe Biden has taken an axe to American energy, attacked American energy, and as a result, we've had massive inflation and an increase in energy costs that have affected the country. The president has rejected the idea of American energy being affordable, available, and reliable. And as a result of that, people all across the country have been suffering the pain of high inflation in the Joe Biden economy. Energy prices since Joe Biden took office are up 36%. Gasoline prices since Joe Biden's been in the White House are up 46%. Gas prices have gone up every month for the last 5 months, and with summer coming, there is no end in sight. You remember last year, before the election, a desperate President Biden tapped into the Strategic Petroleum Reserve in an effort to lower gasoline prices. Can't do that again this summer because the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, our emergency reserves, are at a 40-year low. What we ought to be doing is tapping into American energy that is in the ground, and Republicans have a plan to lower energy costs for the American people. It's the permitting reform, it's the cutting red tape, it's the sort of things that Senator Capito and I are working on. We're having hearings on that. It's necessary for our economy to move forward there for more affordable energy and more American energy. Right now, over half Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. And over the last 24 months in Joe Biden's presidency, American families, due to Biden inflation, have actually had a pay cut each of those 24 months, which is why it is no surprise that Joe Biden's approval number are also in the tank.
Well, we had the big announcement of the president deciding to run for re-election and kicking that off yesterday. Boy, that was exciting. So what President Biden will try to do is tout a lot of his wins. And one of those is infrastructure, and he's going to be talking about that. He's boasting about the $1 trillion that was dedicated to infrastructure, this bill that he's saying is building a better America. And yet, right now, what we see are major transportation projects that are costing American taxpayers a lot of money, more than was anticipated. And so we have these projects that are billions of dollars that are over budget, and they are years behind schedule. So I'll give you an example. This is probably one of my favorite examples out there. It's the California high-speed rail project. Doesn't benefit a lot of taxpayers across the United States, but the Obama-Biden administration had committed $3.5 billion to this project more than a decade ago. President Trump, he did stop it because it was going over budget, over time frame, and he saved about $1 billion on it. But Biden, President Biden, went back in and restored that money and added another $50 million to it, praising the project as an example of the Build Back Better approach. Supposedly it was shovel ready. Okay, but the reality of this train in California is that it won't be completed for another decade, and it's going to cost $100 billion more than it was anticipated. Okay, folks, it is a literal train wreck. And to hold the Biden administration accountable, I've required the Department of Transportation to keep track of these projects that are $1 billion over budget and they're behind schedule. So this week, I'm doubling down on that, and I am introducing the $1 billion Boondoggle Act, which expands these requirements to every taxpayer-funded project. And I'm also introducing the Put the Brakes on the Boondoggles Act, which brings runaway trains like the California high-speed rail project to a halt. Folks, we can't keep pumping pork out there. We've actually got to have some accountability in this administration.
Thank you all for being here. And today, I really wanted to talk a lot about what we've already heard a little bit more, but it falls right into the purview of the Environment and Public Works Committee, where I'm the ranking member. we had our first hearing today on permitting reform. Now, we've talked a lot about how important permitting reform is to energy, to the cost of energy, to consumers, to folks who have jobs in that arena. But it's more than just energy projects. It's manufacturing projects, it's water projects, it's broadband projects. All of these projects have to be permitted before they're allowed to be built. So the administration has touted their Build Back Better, but you can't build back anything better because you can't build it. You cannot get these lengthy delays in permitting are just stymieing everything from renewables to the MVP pipeline in the state of West Virginia to other projects that we've heard about today. So what does reform look like to me? Today in our hearing, we started off with this. First of all, in my view, I think it needs to be everything, all of the above. Renewables, fossil, anything. It has to be a fair process that treats every project fairly. Secondly, we need deadlines. We know time after time these agencies just blow through their deadlines with no penalties, no enforcement measures, and to try to slow bleed certain projects to come to a screeching halt. You know, we're supposed to be building or selling electric vehicles that have chips in them. In order to get the chips, you've got to have the mines. In order to have the mines for the critical minerals, you have to have the permit. So there's a really big disconnect here. So you have to have permits on deadline. Judicial review is another thing that is a total stall tactic by the folks that are against projects moving through these states. So with judicial review, we need to have some firm deadlines on judicial review, some guardrails so that lawsuits cannot just keep pounding, elongating projects, and certainly disrupting the flow of energy, roads, bridges, water, broadband, everything. And lastly, we need to look at all of these provisions. I personally think we ought to push more of the responsibilities to the states. They know their states. They have the environmental parameters within the states to be able to meet the challenge of making a determination of how a project can move forward. And I think there's certain tenets that came out in our hearing today. Okay, we all want environmental review. We don't want to shave any environmental review. All we're doing is making sure that the process is done in a timeline that can actually see something being done. When the process takes longer than the actual process is, than the actual building process, that tells you something right there. You know, community involvement. All of our communities are going to have involvement and want to have involvement in what's being built in their community and the impacts they will have. Yeah, we all agree on that. So we did have some areas of agreement between the Republicans and Democrats. We're devoted to this, both Senator Barrasso and his committee and in our committee in EPW. We're having another hearing in 2 weeks. Energy's having a hearing in a week and a half, I believe. And I think this is absolutely critical to the health, to the economy, to the environment, to everything that impacts our everyday lives. Thank you.
I feel a little bit like Paul Revere. It was about 2 years ago, we were warning the American people that the Democrats, on a purely partisan basis, passed a massive $1.9 trillion spending extravaganza. It would have an inflationary effect. Remember Lawrence Summers, President Clinton's former Secretary of the Treasury, one of President Obama's right-hand people as it relates to economic policy. He was warning Democrats about the same thing. You can't do that without igniting inflationary fires. Well, I'm here to report today that that was part of igniting an inflationary fire that we are suffering greatly now as a country because of inflation and now higher interest rates. Never, ever forget, every single Senate Democrat voted for that bill. Every single Senate Republican voted against it. It was Kamala Harris who broke the tie. And that was the beginning, certainly, of the inflationary fires that we saw lit across this economy. Now, we're riding again here as Paul Revere, warning our country that it is irresponsible for President Biden to give Speaker McCarthy the cold shoulder. It's been 83 days since they've spoken. Speaker McCarthy has come to the table with some common sense ideas to claw back wasteful spending, address the debt crisis. This should be and must be a bipartisan discussion. But it takes two sides to negotiate. We must have President Biden come to the table in a serious way with Speaker McCarthy to solve this pending crisis. So I come before you yet again as Paul Revere, warning our country that if we don't have adults in the room, starting with President Biden, we face a significant financial crisis. I can tell you families deserve more than the Democrats' reckless monetary policies. It's reckless for President Biden to be playing games with this looming debt ceiling crisis. Let's bring back fiscal sanity and fiscal responsibility.
Leader McConnell.
Yeah, first let me just pick up on where Steve left off. The president knows how to do this. He and I did it in 2011. And he knows that sometimes in divided government, you don't get things exactly the way you want them. So I would remind the president, just as he did in 2011, that this is one of those occasions. And until he and the Speaker of the House reach an agreement, we'll be at a standoff. We shouldn't do that to the country. Look at his own poll data. American people expect the president and the Speaker to get together and work this out. And no matter what happens in the House today, whether the measure passes today or doesn't pass today, the cards have already been dealt. We have divided government. The president and the Speaker need to come together and solve the problem.
Leader McConnell.
There's a debate happening among Republicans about a federal role for abortion rights. If you were majority leader again, will there be a vote on the floor of the Senate for some abortion restrictions?
Well, I hope I am majority leader next time. I'll be setting the agenda, and I'd answer a question like that when I was in charge of setting the agenda. Alex?
Leader McConnell, do you have any reaction to President Biden's re-election campaign announcement, and specifically him trying to frame himself as a defender of American freedoms against MAGA extremists, as he says?
Well, I was looking at a poll this morning that said 70% of the people in our country don't think the president ought to run again. I would put myself in that group.
Leader McConnell. Leader McConnell.
Senator McConnell, to that end, Senator Davis has already endorsed President Trump. We've seen several House Republicans already endorse President Trump. When will you endorse in the 2024 campaign, and are you open to the idea of President Trump as the nominee?
It won't surprise you to know that my principal focus and most of my colleagues' principal focus is on trying to get the Senate. We think we have a good chance. Senator Daines has got an outstanding team over at the NRSC, and we're focusing on trying to switch our title from minority to majority.
Leader McConnell, will you